Hi there, welcome to this course on unit testing with Mockito. I am Ranga Karanam. I am a hands-on architect with more than 15 years of experience developing Java web applications. I have been using Mockito to develop testable applications for almost a decade now. One of the most important parts of being a good programmer is understanding how to develop testable applications. Mockito plays a key role in developing testable applications. In this course, you will learn what is JUnit, what is unit testing, how can you do mocking with Mockito, and you'll learn how to write great tests with JUnit and Mockito. All the code, including the step-by-step details, are in our GitHub repository, Mockito tutorial for beginners. The URL is in the description below the video. This Git repository contains the step-by-step details of what we would learn during the course for JUnit, which is 12 steps, and for Mockito, which is 18 steps. We will start with learning basic unit testing with JUnit framework. We will start with annotations, asserts, test suites, and move into advanced concepts like testing exceptions. How do you test for performance, and how do you write parameterized tests? We would then move into mocking and see what is mocking and also what are the alternatives to mocking. What are stubs, what are spies, and why Mockito is famous. We would look into the different features of Mockito, the basic mocking features, how do you verify calls to a method, and a couple of advanced features like matches and argument capture. We will also understand how to create spies, so we will use Mockito JUnit runner and the Mockito JUnit rule. We will integrate Mockito with PowerMock to be able to mock static methods, to be able to mock constructors as well. And also we'll use PowerMock to unit test private methods. The only prerequisite for this course is that you need to be a good Java programmer. We will help you set up Eclipse and Java. Thanks for your interest in this course. If you are ready, then go ahead and click the Enroll button. You can also take a test drive and use the free preview feature. I am excited to share all my experience with unit testing and Mockito. See you in the course. Before we get started with the course, there are three important things that you would need to know. One is about the GitHub repository. Second is how you can get started with installing Java and Eclipse. And the third one is the reviews feature. Let's get started with the GitHub repository. The URL to our GitHub repository is github.com/in28minutes. You can Google for in 28 minutes GitHub and you'd be landing over there. And this specific one is Mockito tutorial for beginners. This contains all the source code that we would be using as part of this course, and also it contains details of all the different steps as well. So JUnit we have 12 steps, Mockito 18 steps. The GitHub repository contains a section called installing tools. There's a PDF here which would help you to install Java and Eclipse. It's a step-by-step guide which would easily take you through installing Java and Eclipse. There's also a video to help you to install. So you can actually follow the PDF step by step and try and install Java and Eclipse. And if you have a problem, then you can watch the video as well. Installing Java and Eclipse is a very, very easy thing. So you should not really have any problems doing that. The last thing we wanted to discuss was the review feature. In some of the course platforms, you might be asked for a review very early in the course. If you are not prepared to leave a review, you can either close the pop-up or you can click the not ready yet button. There you go. Those were the three things which we wanted to discuss during this short video. If you follow the steps in the PDF and you have Java and Eclipse installed, then you're all set. We again welcome you to this course and hope you have a lot of fun. As with all the in 28-minute tutorials and courses, we would start this one in a hands-on way as well. So before we discuss a lot of theory about Mockito, we would start with our step 1 and try and set up a project where we can start discussing things much more. So this is step 1, where we would learn how to set up an Eclipse project with JUnit and Mockito frameworks, and we would end this step once we have a successful unit test. If you have already followed the JUnit course and come up to here, most of these steps should be very easy for you. So it should be a quick step where we get started with JUnit and Mockito. I will launch up Eclipse. You can enter any workspace folder in here. I'm entering Mockito August 2016. That's basically when I'm creating this particular course. Or you can click browse and browse to a specific folder. The workspace is kind of the folder where Eclipse would store all these files. So I'll enter a workspace and click OK. When you launch up a new workspace, Eclipse would bring this particular window up. I'm not really interested in this right now, so I'll just close this. And I would want to start by creating a new Java Maven project. So I would start with File, New Maven Project. Maven is very useful in maintaining dependencies. With JUnit and Mockito, I would want to be able to use these frameworks. I don't want to go to the repositories and download the jars and put them in the build path. Maven is a tool which helps us make it very easy to manage dependencies. If you have no previous experience with Maven, that's not a problem at all. In this course, you'd be able to follow and understand what are the basic things about Maven. You can start off, I'm doing a cancel again, so it's File, New Maven Project, or you can actually say File, New Project and type in Maven. Or the other way of getting this here is right click here and say New Project and type in Maven. So any of the ways you would want to start, that's okay. So type in Maven. We want to create a new project, so New Maven Project, and click Next. So I would choose the default workspace location. The other thing is I would also want to create a very simple Maven project. So these two checkboxes you can check in and say Next. And one of the things with Maven is you need to give a name to the project that you are creating. So this is a new project I'm creating, so I have to name it. And just like a Java class, we have a package. Similar to that, for any project, you need to have a group ID. So I'll just put in com.in28minutes.mockito as the group ID and the artifact ID as Mockito example. So you can actually put anything that you would want in here. I'm just saying com.in28minutes.mockito and Mockito example as the thing. So Mockito course. And I'm going to click Finish. When the project opens up, on the top left folder, you should see all these folders inside the Mockito course. So you'd see source main Java, source main resources, source test Java, and source test resources. Typical Java project, you would have all your source code in source main Java and all your tests in source test Java. That's exactly what we followed during our JUnit course as well. So we write all the code in source main Java and all the tests in source test Java. In a typical Maven project, you also have a pom.xml. Pom.xml is the place where you would declare all the dependencies that you would want. Let's open the pom.xml. Double click on it and it would open this where I can actually click the pom.xml to see what's in there. Right now it's a very simple XML file. There's not a lot of details in there. There's a group ID, artifact ID, and version. In this project, we would want to learn JUnits and Mockito. So we want to use Mockito. So we would want Maven now to download Mockito and JUnit for us. How do we do that? The way we do that is by adding something called a dependencies. So just go and add in dependencies, and the dependency that we would want to add in are JUnit and Mockito. I've made it easy for you by actually going in and actually making the dependencies available on the GitHub. So if you look at this step 1, this contains the dependencies section right here. So you can actually take this dependencies section and instead of typing in dependencies, you can actually start off fresh and actually paste this in. So what you do see right now is these dependencies will be downloaded and added in here. That's the magic of Maven. So now you have these jars downloaded by Maven and made available as part of Maven dependencies for this project. And that's the beauty of Maven, and that's the reason why we are using Maven in this particular project. So instead of downloading the JUnit jar and making it available in the build path, what we are doing is we are using Maven's pom.xml to download these jars and make them available for us. We have a dependency JUnit and we are using 4.12 version of JUnit here and 1.10.9 version of Mockito. So these are the two dependencies which we added in, and here are all the stuff that we would need to run this particular project. So let's get started and start creating a small test to check whether everything is working fine. So I would start with source test Java because we want to create a new unit test. I would create it in source test Java. Right click, new. I would want to create a test class. So I would say test JUnit test case and click next and say new JUnit for test. That's good. Since you are already familiar with JUnit, I would go ahead and quickly create this particular test. So I would call this first Mockito test. I mean, there's nothing Mockito in there yet. And I would want to put this in the package com.in28minutes.mockito. And I would go ahead and click the finish button. So this would create a small test for us. And I'll remove this fail. I would add a simple assert true. This is a funny test because this is actually not testing anything. But just to make sure that there is something being tested, I had just added it in to have some fun. And there you go. So there you see the green bar again. So the way I'm running the test is right click run as JUnit test. So that's basically what we are doing to run this test. So what we have done during this step is that we actually created a simple Maven project, added in two small dependencies, JUnit and Mockito. So Mockito is the thing that we are going to use in this particular course. So we added the Mockito dependency, and also we wrote a simple test. This test is not yet using anything from Mockito yet. We will start with using Mockito very soon. Until the next step, bye-bye. Hi there. Welcome to this section, Getting Started. One of the most important things with Mockito is to understand why we are using Mockito, to understand what kind of a context Mockito fits in. And to be able to understand that, we need to set up our system under test. We need to set up an example that we would want to test. The example that we would be using is a to-do service. This is basically an interface. You can kind of think of it as it integrating with some external web service or a over MQ or some external system and getting at us a list of to-dos. And what we would want to be able to do is to provide business logic around it. So what we'll do is we'll create a to-do business IMPL which will use the to-do service. What we will try and do throughout the examples that we would be doing as part of this course is we'll try and mock the to-do service. So instead of talking to the external systems, we would mock this. We would kind of make it return the values that we would want. And using those values, we would be testing the different methods which are present in to-do business IMPL. So that's the first thing that we would do is we would try and unit test this with a stub. What we'll do is we'll create a to-do service stub, which kinds of returns hard-coded values, and we will write a unit test using that. So we'll write a unit test called to-do business IMPL stub test. That we would do as part of our unit testing with stub example. And once we understand system under test, once we understand how stubs can be used to write unit tests, we will start really writing tests with Mockito. This is really going to be a little slow, but I think with Mockito, it's very important to understand the concepts of stubbing and also understanding the system under test so that we can write really good tests around it. Have some patience. For the next couple of steps, you would be doing a lot of setup and be doing a lot of basic work. But when we start using Mockito, things will really get interesting. In the first step, we looked at setting up the basic project for Mockito. Let's start with the second step. So what would we learn during this step? First thing is we would start creating a simple example to understand why we need mocks. So we'll try and create a basic example, and the basic example is a to-do management application. I mean, this is not really the entire application as such. We would really look at a specific part of the application, and we actually want to create a to-do management system and actually have some kind of a filtering around Spring related to-dos. So we'll create a simple example for that, and we'll try and understand why we need mocks. Let's get an overview of the two important classes that we would create during this step. One of the important things about this step is that this step is not really related to Mockito at all. By that I mean you're not doing anything directly related to Mockito at all. But this step is really important in understanding Mockito very well. To understand Mockito, you need to understand the concept of stubs and mocks and what are the differences between them, and how do you choose one over the other. And this example will set us in a good shape so that we can in the next few steps understand them in little detail. The to-do business IMPL and the to-do service that we would be creating in this particular step are typical Java classes. There is nothing really special about them. I would really request a little bit of patience for the next 5 minutes so that we can get through this, and I promise in the next few steps you would really get started with understanding the base principles of mocking and stubbing and how you can do this with Mockito. The first thing is an interface. It's a to-do service. I mean, you can kind of think of this as an interface which kinds of talks to, let's say, a to-do management application. Let's say it talks to a Wanderlist. So Wanderlist is a website where you can manage your to-dos. So let's say this to-do service.java can talk to any to-do management application and give the list of to-dos for that particular user. The important thing about this to-do service is we don't have the implementation for it with us. So this is an interface which we are making use of. So this is an external interface for this particular application. So that's to-do service. And what we are actually creating is we are creating a to-do business IMPL. This to-do business IMPL, what we want to see is how many to-dos of that user are related to Spring. So let's say a user has 5 to-dos, but only, let's say, 2 of them are related to Spring. So what we want to give is a feature to the user to filter based on a specific topic. So we want to create a method retrieve to-dos related to Spring, and it would call this particular method retrieve to-dos and filters the one which are related to Spring and gives them back to the calling method. So let's quickly try and create these two methods. What we do during this step is try and create these 2 methods step by step. If you are in a hurry, you can actually go to the Github repository and copy these 2 files which are present in here. So there is a to-do business IMPL and there's a to-do service.java. So those are the 2 files that we are talking about. Let's start with creating the to-do service.java. Right click new interface, and I would put it in a package called in 28 minutes data API. The package will not really matter, but I would really want to organize my code really well, so I'm putting it in in 28 minutes data API, and I would want to call this to do service, and I would say finish. And the method I would want to declare in this interface is public list of strings. So I would want to return list of to-dos, and the name of the method is retrieve to-dos for a specific user. So that's the method that we are talking about. I would need to import the list. So I would go ahead and do that. The way you can do that is Control 1 or Command 1 based on wherever you are, and it would bring up the options. I choose java.util.list because that's the one which I wanted to make use of. So that's basically the to-do service, and let's quickly go ahead and create the other class that I would need as well. So the other class I would want to create is the to-do business IMPL. So that's basically the one. So let's go here. So this is the one which I would want to create, to do business IMPL. So right click, new. This time it's a class. So I would put it in the package, not in the data API. I would want to put it in business, and this is the IMPL, or I can just leave it at business, and I would give it to do business IMPL, and I would click finish. So in here I would want to make use of the to-do service. So what I would do is I would create an instance of the to-do service in here. So to-do service, to-do service. I can do Alt Shift S and say generate constructor using fields. So Alt Shift S, generate constructor using fields, or you can manually create a constructor if you would want to. So basically what I'm trying to do is create a constructor. So I've now created a constructor for the to-do service. So to-do business IMPL now accepts to-do service, and the most important thing that I would want to do in here is to create a method which would call the to-do service to retrieve to-dos method and filter the ones which are related to Spring. So the method I would want to create is public. It would also return me a list of strings, and this method I would want to call it as retrieve to-dos related to Spring, and I would want to pass in string user as the input. I would go ahead and press Ctrl 1 and import the list. So now I have this particular thing. So I would go ahead and add a return statement. So it's returning null for now. So what I would do is quickly create a list. So I would start with creating a list of string to-dos. I'll call it filtered to-dos because those would be the ones which are after filtering. So I'll create a new array list, and for now I'll just return this back. What we want to do in this particular method is call the to-do service dot retrieve to-dos. So I would call this with the user, and this would return me list of to-dos. What I want to do is I would want to filter those which are related to Spring. So if you look at it right now, so the to-do service has a method called retrieve to-dos. So this retrieve to-dos is talking to, let's say there's an implementation of this which talks to Wunderlist or any of the to-do management applications, and returns me back a list of to-dos. From those to-dos, I want to filter those things which are related to Spring. So what I want to do is to filter those which are related to string. So I'll loop around the to-dos. So to-dos. I'll just use kind of a basic thing here. I mean, this is not going to be a complicated algorithm as such. So I just want to loop around the to-dos. I would want to start with if to-do dot contains Spring, then I would want to add this to list of to-dos. So filter to-dos dot add to-do. So that's the retrieve to-dos related to Spring method. So basically what we are doing is we are calling a to-do service. The implementation of this to-do service is not really with us. All that we have is an interface, and the actual implementation is not available with us. But the code which we are really writing is the retrieve to-dos related to Spring. So what we are doing is whatever to-dos which are retrieved from the to-do service, we are filtering them and looking for those which are related to Spring. So what we want to do is we would want to be able to unit test this particular method. So what we want to do is write tests for this specific method. So if I really look in terms of the terminologies which are to be used usually, so this is the system under test. So to-do.business.impl is what is typically called, so here to-do-business.impl is called SUT. That's the system under test. If you look at the to-do service, this is a dependency because the to-do business IMPL depends on that particular thing for being able to run and get the details. So if I call this method, then what do we depend on? We depend on the to-do service. So we depend on the to-do service to go and get the list of users, and then we would filter the users based on that. So when we are writing the test for to-do business IMPL, the to-do business IMPL is called the system under test. To-do service is a dependency. And in the next couple of steps, you would understand how we can actually try and stub or mock this dependency. How can we write a unit test for to-do business IMPL when we do not really have the real implementation of to-do service available? The to-do service could be developed by some other team, or could be an external interface I'm talking to. It could be a web service that I'm calling, and or it could be another team which is developing that service, and that service is not really available right now. So how would we able to develop, or how do we able to really test the to-do business IMPL without the to-do service implementation being available? So that's the problem that we would be discussing during the next couple of steps. So what we have set up during this step is the base for understanding what is a stub, what is a mock, and we would look at those things in the next couple of steps. I know we are doing, I understand that this is a little slow start to the course, and we have not really discussed a lot about Mockito yet. Have some patience, we would really get started with Mockito in the next couple of steps. The most important thing with Mockito is understanding why we need Mockito and understanding the problem it is solving. I'm sure that these two steps which we have done until now would lay firm ground for us so that we would understand Mockito in a really good way. So thanks for your patience, and I'll see you in the next step. Welcome to the third step of this Mockito course. Thanks for the patience that you showed in creating the small example in the last step. And in this step, we would try and test the last example with a stub. So we would learn what is a stub, and we would create a unit test with a stub, and we will understand what are the disadvantages of using stubs. To just get an overview of what we did, so we have a to-do service which is the dependency of this particular class. This to-do service is being implemented by some other team which we don't have access to. But we would want to be able to test the to-do business IMPL. What we would need to do is to create some kind of a to-do service. So one of the things that we can do is create something called a stub. A stub is nothing but a sample implementation of this particular to-do service. So I can create a stub class which implements this particular interface. So what we'll do now is we will create a stub for to-do service, and we will try to use that stub to test the to-do business IMPL. So there are basically two steps that we want to do. So the two steps are, one is create to-do service stub, and second thing is test the to-do business IMPL using the to-do service stub. Let's start creating the to-do service stub very quickly. So since this is a stub, I don't want to really create a stub in the main code. I don't want the stub to be included in main code. So what I'll do is I'll create the stub in the test Java, and I would kind of use the same package structure. So it's com in 28 minutes data API. So I'll say right click, new, this would be a Java class, and I would want to do com in 28 minutes. Package would be same as the original class data API, and I would want to call this class to do service stub. Stub is nothing but a class which returns some kind of dummy data. So I'll go ahead and I would want to implement. So I'd want to create a dummy implementation of the to-do service. So I'll say implements to-do service. There's a compilation error. Why is there a compilation error? Because the to-do service has this method. The to-do service has a method retrieve to-dos which we need to stub now. So let's say now add unimplemented method. So this would create a dummy to-do service method, or you can manually go ahead and create this method as well. Public list string retrieve to-dos. So instead of returning null, what I would want to return is an array list with a couple of values in there, so that I can use this as a stub for testing the to-do business IMPL. So what I would want to do is create a, so arrays.isList is a very useful, arrays.asList, is a very useful function. So if I want to create two items, 1, 2, so arrays.asList 1, 2 would create that for me. So this would create a list of these two and return it back. What I would want to really give is a little bit more useful values. So I'm giving a list of to-dos. So I'll enter a little bit better values than 1, 2. So I'm creating learn spring MVC, learn spring, learn to dance as the list of to-dos that I would want to retrieve. So this is a dummy implementation. You can see that this to-do service, we are creating a dummy implementation for that. So this is a stub. So this is a sample implementation of the to-do service. I'm not really talking to the service at all. I'm actually hard coding values and returning them back, so that now when I'm testing the to-do business IMPL, I can make use of this stub. So now let's try and test the to-do business IMPL. So I would go to right click and say new other, and I would type in test. So I would want to create a new JUnit test case. So next I can say which package I would want to put the test in. I'll use the same package as the original class. So com.in28minutes.business. That's where the original class is, and I would want to call this to do business IMPL. Because I'm going to use I'm using a stub here, I'll call it IMPL stub test and click finish. As is usual, a sample test is created for us. So what I would want to do now is I would want to be able to use this stub to do the testing for to do business IMPL. So first thing is I would want to create a to do business IMPL. So to do business IMPL, let's create a to do business IMPL. To do business IMPL is equal to new to do business IMPL. So to create a to do business IMPL, I need a to do service. So let's go ahead and first create a to do service. to-do service. I would want to create a to-do service is equal to new. What we want to make use of in this test is the new to-do service stub. So I'm creating a to-do service stub. To be really specific, compilation error, I have to import this in. To be really specific, I'll actually rename this. So I'll call this to-do service stub. So the shortcut is Alt Shift R, or you can actually do right click, refactor, rename. So that's the one which you can use to change the name of a variable. So I've renamed this to service stub, and I've now created a to-do business IMPL with the to-do service stub. So now we can use this stub to test the method. So I would want to call the method to-do business IMPL dot retrieve to-dos related to some dummy user. I don't really care who the user is because we are hard coding it in this stub, and I'll take this and I'll put it in a local variable. So list filtered to-dos. That's basically it. So since this is a unit test, what we would want to be able to do is to check the filtered list of to-dos. So what we did in the to-do service stub is that we put in 1, 2, and 3, and out of which only 2 are related to Spring. So I would want to check whether the list which is returned back contains only 2 values. So let's do that. How do we do that? We use the assert equals. Assert equals, the first one is expected. So we want the size of the filtered to-dos to be 2. I would want to give a better name to this. So typical naming convention is test and the method test retrieve to-dos related to Spring. I preferred using an underscore to say using a stub. So this makes it clear that this particular test is using a stub to test that. I mean, here it's already, we are putting it here as well. So it's a duplication, depends on whether you like it or not. So I'll do right click, run as JUnit test. So there you go. Now we are able to test this particular thing using the stub. So we created for the stub, for the to-do service, we created a stub and we returned dummy values, and we use those dummy values to check whether this is working or not. So this is how you can create a test using a stub for anything that you depend on. So this to-do business IMPL depends on to-do service, and what we are doing is we created a stub called to-do service stub, and it returned dummy values back. So now this is good. So we are able to write this test. I mean, this is a good test. We can improve this test further to not just look for the size, but to check whether the exact to-dos are populated or not. That I would leave as an exercise for you. So if you look at the exercise, one of the exercise would be to improve the asserts for the array list. So right now we are just looking for the size, whether it's 2, but actually we can test much more. So what we can actually check is whether the 2 items in the array list are these 2. So that I would leave as an exercise for you to do. What we want to really focus on is what are the advantages and disadvantages of using a stub to test. So now this stub is nothing but a real Java class. So let's say I want to create another test case. So here, this particular test case I created where the stub is returning 3 values. But let's say I want to write another test case where this particular method is returning only 1 value back, or it's not returning anything back. So I want to create another test wherein I would want to check for a scenario where I'm passing empty, like when I'm getting no values from the service using a stub. I'll just call it 2. Let's just, I mean, it's a dummy thing, so it's not really doesn't matter what I call it. But in this test, I would want to actually check whether when there is nothing returned back from the service, there is nothing coming back from the business IMPL as well. Here, one of the options I have is I can pass in a dummy one, and then I have the user. So I can say if user is dummy, then return this. If else user is dummy 1, return something else back. Now you can see how complex that kind of a code can become. So when I need more things, then I would need to keep adding logic to my stub. So the stub class will start growing a lot. The other problem you'd have typically when you're using stub is the fact that, let's say, in addition to this, there is another method which is coming in. So let's say in this particular thing, I'm adding a method string user, and let's say there is a new method. Instead of retrieve to-dos, I would say configure something for a user. There's a new method in the interface. What you would see is this stub. Now you need to create the new method in this stub as well, because the stub implements the to-do service. It needs to implement all the methods which are there in this service. So this is the other problem. So you need to start having a lot of maintenance headaches because you're using stubs, because stubs are nothing but real like a dummy implementation of the interface. Whenever you add a new method, delete a new interface, or anything of that kind, you need to keep maintaining this stub as well. So the two main problems with using a stub are dynamic conditions. So when I want this particular method to return different kinds of values in different kinds of scenarios, then it becomes very complex code. So this code will start becoming very large and difficult to maintain. Stubs are useful in very simple scenarios, but in most of the projects we use something more dynamic called mocks. We will get introduced to mocks in the next step. In this step, we looked at a sample test using a stub. We saw how to create a test using this stub, and also we looked at what are the problems that we usually face when we write tests using stub. In the next step, we would start using a mock. Until then, bye. Welcome to the step 4 of Mockito. It's time to say hooray. This is the first step where we'll really use the Mockito framework. In the last step, we looked at what is a stub and what are the disadvantages of using a stub. So what we'll look at in this particular step is what is a mock, how do you create a mock with Mockito, and you'll see a lot of advantages of using mocks. So let's get started. Before we get started in depth, one of the things that we would need to make sure is to be able to easily import static imports. What are static imports? In the to-do business IMPL test, we used assert equals, and the assert equals is actually a static method. If you look at it, is a static method which is declared in the assert class. So this is inside the org.JUnit assert class. So we imported the static import org JUnit assert.star. So if you look at the test, what we do is we would have imported this in. So if I don't do this, so if I'm not importing this, then you'd see there's an error. And if I go and press Control 1 or Command 1 on this, you'd see that there's a suggestion which is brought in to add the static import automatically. However, this suggestion does not come up for all the methods automatically, because JUnit is one of the standard frameworks which is used across the Java world. It is automatically coming up because that's how Eclipse is configured to do it. But if you want other methods belonging to Mockito to come up in this way, you need to do a little bit of configuration. Eclipse in Windows, then you need to go to Window, Preferences. I'm on Mac, so I do Eclipse Preferences. If you are on Windows, then you need to do Window, Preferences, and this would open up, and over here you can type in favorites. If you look at favorites, there are two things coming up: Java Editor Content Assist and JavaScript. We are really worried about the Java part of it. So I will click favorites here. Down here, I can define a list of static members that we can use. So the Content Assist will propose these static members in that particular case. So if I type in a method from one of these classes, then it would automatically suggest to import the static member. So what are the classes I would want to add? There's a list of these classes which are present in here. So org JUnit assert is the default one, which is already being suggested, but the important ones are Mockito, BDD Mockito, matchers, and core matchers. From the start again, so it's Eclipse Preferences or Window Preferences. So and then type in favorites. Be careful with the spelling, and then you need to choose this one under the Java tab and click type. So click on new type, and it would bring up a thing, and you can type in Mockito and click browse. So when you say Mockito, it would bring up this class. So the class which we would want to add is Mockito, that's one. And then I would want to add a couple more classes which we'll be using in the subsequent steps. Let's do this once. So I'll click in new type and type in Mockito. Actually, I want to type in BDD Mockito. So that's one of them. And let's add a couple more quickly. They're all right here. So I can say matchers and add it in, and I can add the core matchers as well. So there are basically 4 classes that we are adding in. We'll learn about these Hamcrest classes very soon. Don't worry about them. The Mockito related things that we added in are Mockito and BDD Mockito. So the way you add them in is very simple. So you click new type and say browse and type in Mockito, and then there would be this class coming up. If you type in BDD Mockito, this would be coming up, and the other ones are Hamcrest matchers. So you just need to type in matchers and core matchers and add them in and say apply and say OK. That's it. So this would make it easy for you to follow the entire course, because as soon as you type in the method, Eclipse would auto suggest the imports. So you don't need to really remember which particular class has something all the time. So as soon as you type in a method, then Eclipse can automatically suggest the import. Now let's get to the actual thing that we want to do as part of this step. The actual thing we want to do as part of this step is not to use a stub, but to use a mock. So what I'll do is I'll copy this test. So I'll copy Control C or right click copy and Control V, and I'll rename this method to do business IMPL. Instead of using a stub, I want to use a mock to write the test. So I'll say mock test. What we are doing here is that we copy the code. So it's actually right now using a stub. So I want to actually use a mock. So I would want to be able to use this mock. This one is using the TodoService stub. So instead of this, I would want to use a mock. What is a mock? In the earlier step, we created a stub. So we created a TodoService stub. The TodoService stub is really a hard-coded class. So it's basically like a hard-coded class which kind of implements the entire thing that this interface defines, and there's a method which returns some dummy values back. It's very difficult to maintain this code because this is really live code, and whenever there is a change in the TodoService, then we need to change all this stuff. So what is a mock in that particular sense? So instead of creating a real live class, there are frameworks which would allow you to create a dummy class or a mock class for that specific interface. So you can say, I want to create a mock for this particular thing. So I want to create a mock for TodoService. So give me a mock. So what this would do is this would return a class. So I'll just say TodoService, some mock class or mock TodoService, and give it the TodoService.class. So what we can do, what those frameworks allow me to do is they would be allowing me to say, okay, when this particular method is called, so let's say on the mock TodoService, a retrieve to do method is called with some parameter, so some parameter, some value. Then what you would want to do in this particular thing is stub this particular thing. So what you do is make this return a value. So here what we are doing is, instead of hard coding a class, so instead of creating a stub class and making it return a list of values, what we are doing here is we are actually dynamically doing it through code. So what we are saying is create a mock for this particular service, and when this method is called on this service, then return this value back. So there are frameworks which allow you to do that. So this is more a dynamic behavior. So this is not static behavior, because I'm defining as part of my code what should be the return value for that particular method. Which class should I mock? Which class should this mock behave like? So all that is pretty dynamic. So there are frameworks which allow you to do these kind of things, and this is what is called mocking. Let's look at an example of Mockito, and let's discuss what is a mock in detail a little later. One of the things you'd see is that mocks offer much more functionality than stubbing. You can ask, how many times is this method called? Is this method called at least once? Mocks offer a lot of more functionality than stubbing, but we'll come there when we finish one example with Mockito. Let's focus on getting this particular test running with Mockito. So what I want to do is, I don't want to use a stub, but I would want to use a mock. Right now this is using a stub, but I would want to change it to use a mock. So I'll go ahead and rename, Alt Shift R or right click refactor rename. So I'll say to do service, and I'm ahead of the time because I'm still using this stub and I'm calling this a mock, but that's okay. So to do service mock is equal to, instead of saying new to do service stub, what Mockito offers is a method called mock. So I want to mock which class? I want to mock to do service class. So I want to mock to do service dot class. So I want to mock to do service class. So I would press Control 1 or Command 1, and I would add the static import for Mockito. So mock is a method in the Mockito class. So if you look at it, so this is a mock class. So I can create a mock object of a given class or an interface. So as you can look here, Mockito can be used to create a mock object of a class or an interface. This mock method would create a mock object for that particular class or an interface which is passed. Before we do anything more, I would want to really debug this method and see how the mock is working. So I'll say right click, debug as JUnit test. Yes, please. I would want to switch to debug perspective. So you can see the objects, the variables which are being created right here. I'm in the debug mode now. So I can go to run and see all the different options that I have. Step into, step over, step, return, and all that kind of stuff. So what I want to do is step over here. So I just press F6. So I'm calling the mock method inside Mockito. So what does it create? It creates a service mock. So you can see that there is an object created. It's called to do service enhanced by Mockito with something cglib or something. But the most important thing for you to understand is the fact that this is using a mock. This is no longer using a stub, but this is actually using a mock from that particular thing. So now what we are creating is we are creating a to do business IMPL with a particular mock. So I'm passing the mock to that and creating it. So let's create the to do business IMPL. So I'll keep pressing F6. So to go into, now I would want to understand how the filter to do's method is working. So I would want to see what's happening in there. So I'll press F5. So I'll go ahead and press F5 here, so that I can go inside the method and see what's happening. I'm inside the retrieve to do's related to Spring method. I'm passing in a user object, but the most important thing for you to realize here is that this to do service is a mock. So this to do service which we are passing in is actually a mock. Let's see what value is returned back. So I'll go ahead and keep pressing F6 to step over, and I would want to, so now we are calling a method retrieve to do's on the user mock. So on the to do service, which is a mock, we are trying to call a method retrieve to do's. Actually, when we wrote the code for this, we didn't tell the mock to do anything. So we didn't say what should happen when retrieve to do's is called. Let's see what would be returned back. So I'll press F6 again. If you see the list of to do's, it's an empty list. So what is happening is that the to do service, which is a mock which we are passing in, is actually returning, when the method is called on the mock, it's returning an empty list. When we did not tell it to do anything, so it's returning an empty list back. This is one of the good features of Mockito framework. These are called nice mocks. By default, Mockito creates something called nice mocks. So this nice mocks, when a method which is not declared or which is not explicitly stated is called on the mock, it would return a default value back. As you can see here, it's returning an empty list back. So what would happen here is that, so there is no to do to loop over, so it would skip the loop and it would actually go back and it would return an empty list back. So if you look at the filter to do's, what does it have? Empty, because there is nothing in there. So this assert would fail obviously because it's checking for 2. So this would fail. So I'll go ahead and I'm no longer interested in what's happening, so I'll go ahead and do resume. So F8. So you'd see that the test would fail. But the most important thing, if you look at what we have learned as part of this particular test, is the fact that I've created a mock. So all that I did was create a mock. I'm not using this stub here, so I'm just creating a mock, and the mock by default is returning a dumb empty list back. So that's good. So now what I would want to do is I would want to define this mock to return the values that I want it to return. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I want to do is when to do service dot this particular method is called. So which method? We already have a stub class, right? So we want to do something really similar to this stub. So when retrieve todos method is called on the mock, what we want to do with the value dummy, retrieve todos is called with the value dummy. What we want to do, we want to return a array list with the specific values back. So the specific method which does that in Mockito is stub. You can also call it when. So there's also a method called when. So I'll start with when. So I'll put when and control 1 or command 1. It would say add static for Mockito when. So when this particular method is called, what do we want to do? We want to then return. What do we want to return? The value which we want to return is what values are there in this stub. So I want to return these values which are already defined in this stub. So I'll go ahead and copy them and create a list with them. So I'll just create a new list and I would return that list back. So what would happen now is when this particular method is called with this value, then what is the value that is returned back? Then to-dos are returned back. So you can actually try and debug this and check how it works. I'll directly run this test. This test now succeeds because what we have now done is instead of the stub, so instead of using this stub, we are using a mock. So we have now defined a mock and we made the mock when it's called with a specific method to return a specific value. So when the TodoService mock is called with a dummy value, it has to return these to-dos back. So in these 3 lines of code, we have created something very similar to this stub that we had created earlier. So if you look at the stub, so this is what the stub did. So we had to create a real class to do that. Instead of that, what we did now is to actually define what to do in the mock. So the most important advantage of the mock is that now I can make it return different values. So if I want to really write a new test, so I can go ahead and create a new test. So instead of calling using a mock, I'll say with empty list. So all that I need to do is copy the earlier one and I'll say with empty list and I can say array.as list. So return nothing back. So empty list, or I can create a new array list here to return that particular thing back. And now what would I expect because I'm giving an empty list? I would expect 0 back. Now this particular test also would pass. So right click, run as JUnit test. This one also passed. So both the tests are now passing. So now I'm able to test 2 different scenarios without really having any complex logic at all. Doing this with this kind of things with stub would be really difficult, but with a mock, these kind of things are really easy. So the thing which we learned during this step is how do we create a mock. So the first thing which we learned is how do we create a mock. So we use the mock method which is defined inside the Mockito class. So this creates a mock object of the given class. The other method which we made use of is when. So when is used to stub a method. So we want to stub this method call with the return value. So then return is the one it sets a return value to be returned when a method is called. So when in combination with then return. So when this method is called with a specific value, then return this thing back. So then this particular value is returned back. So I'm using that mock to test the to do business IMPL. So we call the actual method and check whether the values that are returned back are as expected. And you can also see how flexible it now becomes. So now I can create a different test with a different return values. I can make the method return that value back and I can test whether these scenarios are working fine. So that's the flexibility that a mock brings in. So you can do different kinds of tests using a mock. We actually covered a lot of things in this particular step. So I think it's very good if you can take a break and try and redo the entire step. One of the important things that you can do is play around with code. So I would really recommend you to debug the whole thing, try and play around with the mock, try and put debug breakpoints at each one of the places and try and debug to see what's happening inside. And one of the things that you can also think of is what are the JUnit best practices that we are not adhering to. There are certain things that we are not really adhering to at this point. We'll slowly change that. For now, the focus was on getting you to learn mocking, stubbing, and things like that. So there were a few JUnit best practices that we were not following. So try and see if you would be able to identify them for enough, and also make sure that you visit the Mockito official documentation. So there is a link down here on the GitHub step 4 page which points to the latest Mockito documentation. So there's a lot of stuff down here. So if you are really interested, you can go down there and check what Mockito is all about. So those are the exercises for this particular step. Try and spend some time repeating these steps and do the exercises, and I will see you in the next. Now that we have a little bit of familiarity with Mockito, we can go into the basics of Mockito. During the next step, we would try and mock the list interface. Aha, I call it a class. It should have been mocking list interface. What we would do is we would mock the list interface, and we would kind of try and do different things around it. We would try and see if we can return different values on subsequent calls. We will talk about something called argument matches. We will see how to throw exceptions. So you are going to use list interface a lot, and after that we would try and play around with the BDD style. BDD is a very interesting style of writing your tests. So we would try writing BDD style tests with Mockito, and other than mocking methods with Mockito, you can also verify if a specific method is called on a mock. So is this method called? Is that method called? Is this method called with this argument? So those are the things that we would do as part of the next sequence of steps. I'm sure you are in for an interesting ride. Let's get started. After a long step 4, welcome to the step 5. In this step, we would learn a few Mockito examples. We would do a few Mockito examples mocking the list class. So list is one of the interfaces in the Java util package. So we'll take that list interface and we'll try to create mocks for that particular class. We would return multiple values from a single method. So is that really possible? Yeah, with a mock it's really possible. And we would look at how to use argument matches, and we would also look at stub method and how you can throw exceptions from a mock. So those are the different things that you would learn as part of this step. We'll take a look back at what we did in the previous step first. So what we did in the previous step is we were able to mock the TodoService class. So we created a mock for the TodoService class using the mock method, and what we did was we made the TodoService mock.retrieve todos. So basically we are saying TodoService mock, when retrieve todos is called on you with a value called dummy, then return back todos. The way we would do that is we would use the when method. So when this particular method is called, then return this. So that's basically what we made use of to return a specific value from a method call on a mock. So this method call on this mock will return this value when this argument is passed to it. So that's basically this is what is called typically stubbing a method. So this is dynamically stubbing a method. Actually, this is not really hard coding stuff, so I'm not really creating a method like that, but we are actually doing that dynamically. So this is creating a mock. This is making the mock return a specific value on a specific method call. That's what we looked at in the previous step. So let's start with trying to mock a list interface now. So what I'll do is I'll go and reset my perspective. So window, open perspective, and I'll move to Java. I'll go to my favorite perspective for writing code so that I can go to the test Java. So now I would want to create a new class. So I would want to create a new test for the list interface. I'll start the usual way. So right click, new, other, and I can type in test, JUnit test case, and I can say list test, and I would just say finish, and I would not worry about it. I'll remove the fail line and I would get started. So I would want to mock the list interface. So what is the way I can mock a list interface? Mock of list dot. Let's import the list class. I would want the Java util list, and also now I can actually see that list mock is now declared. What we want to do is I would want to actually mock the list mock.size method. So I would want to mock the list.size method, and I would want to return a value 2. How do I do that? So what I would need to do is when this particular method is called, what I want to return back? I would want to return back a value 2. So when this particular thing is called, then I would want to return a value 2. So let's write a quick JUnit to check whether the mock is working fine. So assert equals, I will call listmock.size and see if this is returning the right value. So let's also control1 add static import for assert.start. So let's run this test quickly. Right click, run as JUnit test. Alt Shift X C, Control F11, whichever you'd want, where you would want to. And this particular test is running fine now. So let's call this method. One of the important things is you don't really need to call every method with a test. Like with earlier versions of JUnit, it was important that a method name started with test because that used to signify a unit test. But now with the test annotation, it's not really important. So you can call it anything. Some people still would want to start with test, more the traditionalists, I would say. But for me, I don't really worry about it. So let's mock list size method. I'm just renaming it to make sense to me. So let's mock list size method. So that's what we did. So we mocked the size method to return a value we wanted to return. So whenever you call list.size, how many ever times you would call list.size, you would get the same value back. So let's check that up. So I'm calling the method 3 times now, and you'd see that the test succeeds. So each one of those times, the value which is returned back is 2. So now I would want to actually create multiple return values from a particular mock. How do I do that? So let's mock list size, and I would want to return multiple values back. So the first time I call it, I want to call a specific value, and then I would want to return something else. So dot then return 3. So let's see this. Awesome. Which line is failing? Let's double click here. So the second line is failing because it's returning a value, not 2. The first time it returns a value 2. The second time it would return a value 3. So the way we are saying it is when list.size, then return 2. So the first time list.size is called, we return back 2. The second time it's called, it returns back 3. So now let's run the test and see if everything works fine. There you go. So now it works fine. So the first time list.size is called, it returns 2. The second time it's called, it would return 3 back. Okay, now that we assert mocked list.size, I would want to go and mock list.get method. So I would want to mock the list.get method. So let's mock list.get, and I would want to mock the list class, but I would want to mock the get method. So dot get method. For the get method, I need to pass a number. So the way I would pass it is by putting in a 0. So when get of 0, I would want to return back, not this. Let's say I would return a string back. I'll just say in 28 minutes. So let's see what would happen. So when list.get of 0, what would I get back? When I call that method on the mock, I would get back in 28 minutes. Alt Shift X T, it runs the test. What is more interesting for me is what would happen when I check for list of get of 0. So if I do instead of get of 0, I would do get of 1. So I have not set any value for this. What would happen is the nice mock behavior would kick in. So what would happen is this would return a value null. So when I call a non-stubbed method, so this is really a method which I am not stubbed. So you'd see that the test succeeds because this is actually working fine. So if I didn't do this, if I didn't do get of 0, then probably this one would have returned null. That's basically the default nice mock behavior of Mockito. One of the important things is in earlier mocking frameworks, I mean, EasyMock was a famous mocking framework before Mockito, and in EasyMock there was no, like this this nice mock behavior was not really a default. So by default, if there is any method which is invoked, the expectation for which has not been set earlier, the test would start failing. That was one of the things with EasyMock which I didn't really like, because it kinds of creates a lot of brittle tests. But with Mockito, nothing like that. So it kind of assumes a default functionality when, so it's the nice mock behavior is the default. So it kind of returns nulls or empty lists or default values when a method is called. So when an expectation is not set and that particular method is called, Mockito is much safer. So it's much nicer. So I quickly undid the changes and I put the stubbing back. So when listmock.getZero is called, we are returning in 28 minutes back, and I'm asserting in 28 minutes in here. Let's say every time listmock.get is called, I would want to always return in 28 minutes irrespective of the parameter that is passed. That's where things like argument matcher comes in. So this is called an argument matcher. So what I want to do is anything, so instead of 0, I would need to put something called any int. I just need to say any int, and any int is one of the things which is present in the Mockito class. So probably we would need to do a static import. I'm not sure why it's not picking up. So let's manually add a dot any int. So, or we can actually make this a star, and any int is now automatically detected. So any int is what is called an argument matcher. If you click the documentation of it, the method does not do any type checks. It is only there to avoid casting. So this is basically any int. So this would match any int. So if this method is called with any integer or null or anything, so then it would return the value back. So what you would see is even the second value would return back in 28 minutes. That's a quick test. Okay, that's great. So whether you are calling it 0, whether you're calling with 1 or any other value, this would always return in 28 minutes back. This concept is called argument matchers. So if you look at the Mockito class and do any, the Mockito class extends matchers, and in here you would see that there are a lot of any things. So you have any boolean, byte, char, int, long. So any of these, so any collection, any vararg, or any string, any list. So you can even say something called any object. So instead of any int, I could have said any object, then it would have met anything that is passed to that specific method. So you can use it for any specific class. So, or you can say anything of specific class as well. So these are all the different argument matches which are defined by Mockito, and these are the different things that we could have used here as a matcher. So because here the value which is being passed is an integer, I'm saying any int. If it was a string, I would have said any string. So based on that, you can use the argument matchers. The next thing I want to do is to make this method throw an exception. So when listmock.get any method, then I wouldn't want to return anything, but actually I want to throw an exception. So dot then throw. So this would throw a new runtime exception of something. So this will mock the list.get to throw a runtime exception. So what I can do is I can actually, instead of assert equals, this will not work anymore because the list.mock would throw an exception. So I would just do list.get of 0, and I would use a JUnit feature. So how do you test an exception with JUnit? So I'll say expected is equal to runtime exception dot class. So this would check if an exception is thrown. So let's see, right click, run as JUnit test. So as you can see, this test succeeds. So what is happening is when listmock is getting called with any integer, this would throw a runtime exception. So here I'm really calling the listmock.get of 0, and this would throw an exception, and so this is catching it. So if you'll see that if I don't have this in here, then this test would fail. So I'm doing a right click, run as JUnit test without the expected tag, and it's saying that runtime exception something. So this is throwing a runtime exception something, so this test starts failing. So to prevent it from failing, I would just add an expected tag in here. So that's basically a lot of methods that we have stubbed as part of this particular step. So we started with making a single return value from the list mock, and then we return multiple values, and then we use an argument matcher to return a specific value from the list.get, and then we moved into argument matchers, and we also discussed how to throw an exception. So those are the different things that we discussed as part of this step. Until next step, there is one question we are frequently asked. What do I learn next? Our In 28 Minutes course guide has the answer to that question. Think about this for a moment. What gives most satisfaction to a course creator? Lots of money? Yeah, it does. But what else? Great reviews. Yay, that's it. For me, the happiest moments are when I really receive great reviews. And we had 1500 such moments in the last 8 months. So that's 1500 5-star reviews in the last 8 months alone. Thank you for that. These reviews really reflect what we wanted to achieve when we started in 28 minutes. There is one question we are frequently asked. What do I learn next? Our In 28 Minutes course guide has the answer to that question. It has the details of our most popular free and paid courses. You will find a link to it in the description of the video. Let's take a quick overview of the different courses that we created for you. As Kevin says, the Java EE Made Easy course gives you the big picture. There are a lot of pieces that make up the Java EE, and this course would help you to understand how all the pieces fit together. The Spring MVC course takes you through a journey of building a web app in 25 easy steps. As Alexander says, we follow the 2080 principle and take you through a great journey with Java servlets and JSP, building a Java EE web application in 25 easy steps. Maven is the dependency management framework used in more than 80% of the projects. This course takes you through a journey with Maven with real-world examples. And we have courses on C for beginners and also C puzzles for interview preparation. We have a huge list of free courses as well. Spring, Eclipse, JUnit, Design Patterns, Java, Test-Driven Development, Transaction Management, JavaScript, Java Collections, Mockito. And we are #1 on YouTube for Java interview questions. Good luck with your learning. Always remember that the best way to learn is by doing. You would never learn riding a bike by just watching somebody do that. Similar to that, learning programming is all about getting your hands dirty. Keep getting your hands dirty and good luck.